Okay, thanks everybody. We're just going to give people a minute or two to start. Thanks for those who've been prompt. We'll get going in a minute or so. Welcome to everybody who's joining. I can see the numbers trickling up. I'll just give it a few more seconds before we get going. Okay, I think we will make a start. Thank you everybody for joining. We're going to get going now. I'm Tom Fitzlucas from PA Consulting. I lead a lot of our major organisational change and transformation projects in the UK public sector. I'm delighted to welcome you all today to our 12th in the series of PA's Business Psychology Forum events. For those of you who are joining for the first time, we run these sessions every quarter or so, and the established format is that a PA chair, and today that's me, poses a series of questions to some expert panelists on some of the biggest trends or challenges facing organisations today. And hopefully you're all aware that today's event is all about how leaders sustain momentum and protect their people in an era of transformational overload. The reason for choosing that topic actually is fairly simple. We're working with clients across a real range of sectors, all facing this same challenge at the moment. There's huge demand for change for all of those different organisations in response to a range of different societal or technological shifts. And the response from most of those organisations is by necessity to try and deliver several changes concurrently. But the reality is that that's quite a difficult thing to do. Maintaining momentum across those different initiatives without overloading leaders, colleagues, and customers can be a real challenge. So today we're going to ask three fantastic panelists for their views on that challenge and how to overcome it. And I'm hugely excited about today. I've been looking forward to it for weeks. A couple of housekeeping points before we get going. Firstly, we're going to record the session for those of you who are unable to attend live and are watching this back, or if you'd like to share it on with colleagues who haven't been able to make it live. And the second thing is on questions. I've got a set of pre-prepared questions that I'll be posing to our panelists during this window. But if you have questions, please do post them via the chat. I'll keep an eye on that as we go and kind of feed them in through the discussion, and I'll try and get through as many as we can. So please do post those questions, and I will keep reviewing. Okay, without further ado then, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to provide a quick introduction, and then we'll get going on some of our first questions. So Lynn, if I could come to you please first just to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everybody. It's really great to be with you. My name is Lynn Owens. Until this time last year, I was Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service, and before that, I was privileged to be Director General of the National Crime Agency. I have an almost 36-year career in public sector, primarily policing, law enforcement and national security. Through that time, done lots of change and very happy to talk about it. So thanks all.
Thank you, Lynn. And Chris?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So I've been working in major programs for about 28 years, and I'm coming at it from today from that perspective. Then actually what I've learned is that major program delivery, be it in the energy, power, built environment or civil engineering sectors, are actually major change and transformation programs in themselves. And what I find is that we often underestimate that, or we don't go the course. And I'm really interested in terms of what happens to the kind of human dimension around that when it's handled well, and when there are things we can learn as well.
Great, thanks, Chris. Look forward to getting some of that in the discussion. And finally, Caroline.
Good afternoon. I'm Caroline Kendrick, a chartered organisational psychologist. I've been working for the past 20 plus years with leaders and transformation teams delivering big change in a variety of flavours. Increasingly over the last decade, I keep hearing the same sentence in different organisations. We can do the change, we just can't do all the change at once. So I'm delighted we're having this conversation today.
Fantastic, thank you all. Okay, so in my introduction, I said that most organisations, from my perspective at least, are experiencing heavy change load at the moment, which risks their people and their customers becoming overloaded. So my first question is, are you seeing that same heavy change load within organisations? And what do you think leaders can do to maintain clarity through the range of different changes being implemented based on your experiences? Lynn, I'll come to you first, please, for your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I was trying to think back, and it's hard for me to remember a time in my career where I haven't had to lead change in organisations. And I think probably it was the financial issues of 2010 that first started very significant change for the public sector, and particularly the policing sector. And that got me thinking, for the purposes of today, of the change that I've been in over all that time. What's motivated it? What's caused it? And I think I come up with three headings. The first is the nature of threats facing the United Kingdom, both negative and positive, actually. The arrival of technology, which has both positive and negative connotations, necessitates the need for organisations to change. The second thing in the public sector is the financial climate. How much budget are organisations given? And certainly in a policing context, there is a requirement in law for policing to run an efficient and an effective service. And in a diminishing budget with the changing threat, that is, of course, complex. And then, of course, the last thing, and it's certainly what sparked some of the change that we went through in my time in the Metropolitan Police Service, which actually continues today, is some concerns about delivery. Actually, are you providing the right service in that instance to the people of London? So when those three things collide, it is inevitable that you end up with a complex change programme. And I think you get different responses to that change programme depending on whether you're closely involved in the change or whether you are either members of the public or members of the workforce that are implicated by the change. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about actually how you can keep both sets of parties informed along the way. But that is my experience. My experience is, yes, for at least the last 25 years, there's been significant change in the public services. And to be blunt, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Thanks, Lynn. Great to get your reflections and experience on that. Chris, can I come to you for your thoughts on how leaders can maintain that clarity through the range of different changes being implemented?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I think the first thing I would say is when I started getting working on major projects and programs, I was told that you need to be comfortable with change to work on major programs or complex programs. I think what my experience actually taught me, yes, there is change, yes, there is change load, but actually a major component of that is how we manage uncertainty. So you'll probably hear me talk today a lot about communication and leadership communication. So the key way that we do that well is through leadership communication. And I was remembering a time we were just about on Tideway. It was about 2015, and we just got the financing. We just got the main works contracts, and we just got the consent, and we'd done all this work in readiness for that period. But we discovered that there was something different that came with the financing that we weren't expecting, that their investment structure actually encouraged much more spend earlier than we'd been prepared for. So it's this sort of unplanned change sometimes. We'd spent 2 or 3 years planning our culture, planning the way we're going to work, and then this completely unexpected change came in through the novel funding arrangements. So we had to completely pivot to, and there was a lot of leadership communication about the why and the benefits around that. And then with the program progressed, but then we started to hit problems, as you do in the program, in the delivery. And what we found then was we'd forgotten the premise that we had been geared up for, which was an alliancing enterprise, highly collaborative framework where we all pull together best for programs. So we needed almost like the re-chipping leadership message to come back in to remind us of our original purpose. And I've seen someone do some leadership comms around change, which really helps, I guess, unburden that sense. Sometimes we can have a sense of heavy change load when in actual fact it's the communication that helps us through it. So Mike Gerard was leading the Thames Water team on Tideway as well, just as we're coming to this transition point, and he did something very, very simple. It sounds so simple as like why wouldn't we all do it? But he used the metaphor of a ship, and a ship being in dock, a ship being fettled for its journey, a ship being loaded up with cargo, a ship going through dock, and then a ship going out onto its voyage on the seas. And just that simple communication enabled people to understand where we were going, and that there was going to be change as we went on that journey. So those for me are a couple of examples that come to mind. And as I started with, really, I suppose, in my experience, sometimes it isn't heavy change load, it's how we manage and communicate the change and preemptively prime people for it so they can sort of process it.
Great, thanks, Chris. Really interesting perspective there. Caroline, over to you.
Yes, absolutely. Seeing very heavy change loads across most of the organisations that I've been working with recently. And the research actually backs this up. This isn't just our perception. It shows that it's not any single change that creates overload. It's actually the frequency and the accumulation of change that drives uncertainty and, quite honestly, emotional exhaustion in people. Add to that what we know about our attention. Our cognitive bandwidth is finite. So when leaders run multiple change narratives in parallel, people don't prioritize better. What actually happens is their focus becomes fragmented. Practically, what that means is that clarity doesn't come from more communication. It actually comes from better sense making. So people need that plausible story that helps them understand what matters now. So the leaders who navigate this well are very explicit. Here's what's changing, here's what's not, and here's what matters right now. They sequence ruthlessly and connect initiatives into a single narrative rather than lots of disconnected programs, which we're seeing a lot of across organisations. Ultimately, despite what we might think, people aren't inherently resistant to change. What they do resist is confusion. And unfortunately, we create far too much of that within organisations at the moment.
Great, thanks, Caroline. Good to hear the research evidence points as well, showing that experience is borne out by that too. So we've all talked about kind of different experiences, I guess, from the past few years. Something I've heard a lot recently is we're really suffering from change fatigue. We've got so much going on now, people are really suffering from that. But the truth is that experience has now gone on for many years. What are the early warning signs that you look for to detect this, and how can we shift the dial so that we generate momentum rather than burnout and fatigue? And Caroline, I'll start with you this time.
Marvelous. Yes, so like you, I hear the phrase change fatigue all the time and have been hearing it for years now. And that's because it's less of a temporary state and more of a chronic condition. One early warning sign, and I'll keep throwing in my research references, is the distinction between surface compliance versus real commitment. So people may look supportive, but behaviourally they disengage much earlier than they used to. So you see lower discretionary effort, polite nodding, yes, and much shorter time horizons in their thinking. What's interesting is that momentum doesn't actually come from trying to motivate people harder. And again, evidence is quite clear on this. It's progress, not motivation, that's the strongest driver of energy. So practically shifting the dial means helping people see tangible progress, removing the existing burdens that we know are taking up far too much of people's time, and being really honest about the trade-offs. We can't do everything at once, so some things have to stop for other things to happen, and that's how you generate momentum instead of burnout.
Brilliant, thanks, Caroline. And Chris, interested in your thoughts on this too.
So just to be a little bit contrary, I suppose I would say prevention is better than cure. And certainly on major programs and we're often talking 10 years plus now, on these £1 billion major programs, there are phases, there are stages, there are gateways, and so what we see as good practice is kind of picking the right horses for the right courses. That in itself is one key measure for making sure that you maintain energy, and it also gives a clarity to the organization and the enterprise that some new leadership is coming in. It's coming in for a reason. It's coming in for a season, let's say, and pre-planning that and priming people for that is a good way of going about it. But obviously, the questions about early warning signs when that isn't happening, or the enterprise is suffering with change or change overload. So some things we see that are often surface is that a lot of effort goes in front in terms of the collaborative approaches to doing these big major programs, a lot of chartering, a lot of work on culture. But an early sign that change is starting to hit hard is when people stop talking about we and us, and people start talking about they and them. And actually that perhaps isn't so much of an early warning sign. We've gone downstream some way. Another thing that I look out for personally is, are we talking about best for program, best for our outcomes, and are we working on those things together, or have we kind of retreated into our area, our function, our role, or our company? And that kind of puts grit in the gears, and complex programs need high degrees of collaboration and best for program thinking. What we all often see as well sometimes is that the frameworks and the requirements and the specifications that stood up early on with best intent can sometimes become rule books, and it's easy to hold to a rule book rather than actually going, how do we collectively orient ourselves around a single purpose and a single objective as the program, and is everything that I'm doing serving that purpose in this moment, would be the test. And we've done a few leadership shifts on programs which has sort of reoriented the program around that, and that helps bring clarity of purpose again, and re-energizing.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. I want to move us on and maybe onto the kind of back to the title of the session, which was really about how do we sustain momentum in change. I think we probably all agree that successful change initiatives maintain change energy rather than allow us to get to a point where we experience burnout. How do you think that we can best kind of initiate, sustain, and indeed, when necessary, maybe even course correct momentum throughout a change programme. Lynn, interested in your views on this.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I mean, I've worked in two organisations, and I'd like to draw out some examples from each, if that's okay, that I think have relevance here. So the National Crime Agency is an organisation that has an international footprint, but is a relatively, in inverted commas, small organisation under 7,000 headcount. And then I compare that with the Metropolitan Police Service, which has a responsibility to serve a geography, so a sort of bounded organisation, but employing just over 40,000 people. And in many ways, it's interesting to do the compare and contrast about how you initiate, sustain, or course correct in those different organisations. So if I could draw on first an example from the National Crime Agency, when I was there, we saw the changing nature of the threat from illicit finance, and we made the case to government to build three new capabilities. Now, whilst the case for change, so the initiation was recognised by everybody in the organisation, there was some potential threat there to other organisations, because actually illicit finance has a minimum of 6 statutory partners. Some would say many more if you include, as you should, private sector and other third sector parties. So their initiation and sustainment was as much for leadership about actually convincing people that the mission wasn't about control or power, but was actually about trying to do the right thing in the public interest. But actually sustaining that positive culture, i.e. we're building this thing with good shared intent. One, that took longer, it took more time, because I did not have all the levers at my control. My SRO did not have all the levers at their control. So it took a lot more negotiation, and we had to listen far more closely to the clues from other organisations saying, actually, if you don't course correct on this bit, we will be backing away from the change. So I think there's something about whether you own the totality of the decision making and own the totality of the levers. Compare that to the Metropolitan Police Service, where actually for the changes we had to do there, we did hold many of the levers, but we also had huge expectation from the public, expectation from regulators, expectation from officers and staff within the organisation. And of course, we did have the Baroness Casey review, and one of her findings oft got quoted back at us, rightly so, which is that people in the front line in the Metropolitan Police Service felt that leaders were more interested in initiatives, she called it initiativeitis, than they were in long-term sustainable change for either the benefit of the public or the benefit of the organisation. So there we spent a period of time developing a plan. It was called New Met for London 1. I'm pleased to say in my tenure, much of that was delivered, and there is now a New Met for London 2. They're all published. You can look at them and see them if you'd like to. But I think the thing that I learned through the process is, even with a thoughtful plan that we had fully consulted on, with all the right programme, the right support from suppliers and others, there were many instances where actually change took longer to achieve than we thought it would, and actually making sure that you could keep people with you on that journey so they didn't feel like they were just receiving multi-layered initiatives was a real challenge.
Brilliant, thanks, Lynn. Great to hear two quite different examples and how they kind of draw on different techniques, if you like, to sustain that momentum. Chris, interested in your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, well, perhaps I'll just start with an example where drift occurred, and I wouldn't say there was a great job of sustaining, but it did come to a moment where it came to a head where it was obvious that course correction was needed. And this was actually back in 2006. I was working in a company called KBR, and a new president came in to lead the company after a period of making some losses on some construction jobs. And he said one thing. He said, we're going to be more thoughtful about risk. what actually ensued and transpired over the last the sort of following year, 18 months, was an accretion of rules and regulations and commercial thinking and approaches, to the point where the pro forma you had to fill out to put through new work meant that there wasn't even a box on the pro forma for us to fill out for the prospect that we're working on. And it took quite a bit of time thinking about this, but actually what we ended up doing was writing in the margins on the white space around the boxes. And we were thoughtful about risk. And this went up the chain for approval. And there was just a moment of realization. I thought, actually, this is brilliant, because they're thinking about the risk, they're demonstrating how they're doing the risk. And there was a realization that actually perhaps they've gone too far. So there is a lot of work to be done to initiate, sustain, and potentially course correct when you need to do it over the long term. And I think that was an example of how drift can occur, and how a leadership intent can be given, but you have to check in that the cascade of communication is actually translating and applying the actual real intent. On Tideway, and I don't make no apologies for using Tideway as an example, because there's so many rich examples. We went through a number of phases. Actually, there was a real investment, not just up front, but through the life of the program, and an acknowledgement that it was an investment that needed to be sustained through the life of the program, to achieve all of the objectives, to achieve the transformation, to maintain the culture. So that kind of showed up in evolving operating models and recognizing the benefit and the need for doing that. That showed up in making sure that the whole supply chain contributing to Tideway was bound in by co-creating the culture up front, co-creating the initiatives, hopefully not initiative overload, but the initiatives that were felt to be right to deliver the program, and that they got the kudos for that alongside the Tideway as the client as well. And in fact, towards the end of the program, and we sort of identified that actually we had 3 contractors, a program manager, and a client team, and actually we were sort of in downsizing mode towards the end of the program. It was in no one's contract to do this, but we said, wouldn't it be more cost effective and efficient if we all came together as an integrated team? So we dropped our badges at the door, and we performed that function together. So that wasn't in the contract, but that required obviously some effort to make that happen. And if it hadn't have happened, we wouldn't have been able to deliver as well and as cost effectively. So those are a couple of things that come to mind. One example of where it doesn't go so well, and one example where it does. But I think my learning is, with many organizations on long programs, we start well, and then we hit some bumps in the road. It takes sustained leadership effort. It takes sustained investment and attention over the long course.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. Another couple of really good examples showing real breadth there. I'm conscious we're about halfway. The questions have started to come in on the chat, but just as a reminder for those of you attending, please do post some questions. I'll be reviewing them in parallel. I've got a few more of my own, and then I'll start moving to audience questions as well. I'm going to shift now to how we get the best out of people who are either leading or maybe experiencing the change. Change programs often face people with a range of different responses to change. Sometimes people refer to this as experiencing Tiggers, so people who are really enthusiastic about the change, and maybe at the other end of the spectrum, some eaters who perhaps are a bit more negative, but often have great points to make in order to help improve how change can be delivered successfully. How do you think we can get the best out of both of those different character types and everyone in between without it feeling draining for them? Caroline, interested to get your views on this first.
Superb. Thank you, Tom. I really like the Tigger and Eeyore framing because it captures something very real. And again, research strongly supports that we shouldn't be trying to convert one into the other. Work on psychological safety shows that teams perform better when dissenting voices are welcomed early. This is really important, and in practice, it's the healthiest teams that make this really, really explicit. So optimists help mobilize energy, skeptics help stress test the risk. The draining dynamic comes when skepticism is suppressed and turns passive resistance instead. So leaders who get this right give out those two different roles. The advocates help drive the momentum. The skeptics help improve the quality. I had a very real experience of this a couple of years ago. We were running a pilot prior to a much wider launch, and one of the SMEs we were working with would send the team reams and reams of feedback at every stage to the most minutiae of detail. And after a while, I noticed the program team were starting sort of wearying from this and starting to badge the SME as difficult. I challenged them on this. I said, is this person intentionally trying to be difficult, or do they care about getting this right more than anyone else? Because ultimately, running this in the future is going to be their job. And they've got the gift of the most wonderful attention to detail that, if anything, we need to be careful of not overburdening this person because we need them. Anyway, the perception and relationship changed with them almost overnight, just from that simple reframing of the strength this perceived Eeyore was actually bringing to the program. So optimists help you move faster. Skeptics help you avoid very expensive mistakes. You need both.
Brilliant, thanks, Caroline. Lynn, I'm sure you've experienced a whole range of different character types in the changes you've led, so keen to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I love Caroline's description. Actually, I think she's absolutely nailed it. I mean, for me, I love an Eeyore, and that might say something about my own character type or my cynicism as a career investigator. But I think the truth of the matter is that there is often something in what Eeyores are saying. And I think the point Caroline has just made is that actually very few people actually are cynical of change in and of itself. But often they have spotted things because they have a different risk radar, or actually they have the on the ground, from my position perspective, that sometimes the Tiggers haven't seen. So as a strategic leader who's responsible for the Met's overarching change programme, I personally, and perhaps surprisingly, have slightly more challenges with Tiggers who are like, it's all fine, nothing to see here, don't worry, we're going forward. And I think as a leader, that's really dangerous, because actually you can be keeping momentum, but you can be missing some very significant risks. Specifically, you can be losing either the public or your people along the way and not realise it. And you can get to the end where you get a beautifully green programme report saying everything's been delivered on time and to target. But actually, if that hasn't been done in a way where the culture of the team is right and everybody believes in the team, everyone on the team believes that what's been delivered is the right thing, then means you have to spend months and months investing in effectively last minute course correction. And actually that then undermines anything you may want to do in the future, because people will start to say, well, we told them, they didn't listen. And actually, if they'd have just slowed down a bit, they could have corrected some of those things. Now, of course, there will always be those who go one step too far and expect everything to be perfect. And we just don't live in a perfect world. And I'm sure we'll perhaps come on to talk about communication, but being able to be very candid to both Tigger, slow down a little bit. EORs, we're listening to you, but we can't fix all of your problems, seems to me to be the way through this very, very messy period of change that I think we all find ourselves in.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. That's really, really helpful responses from both of you actually on how to deal with those different character types. So thanks very much. I'm going to shift us on slightly to think particularly about leaders and the energy that leaders can create. I think we all recognise that motivation can be contagious when you work with a great leader. So I'm interested in hearing when examples from your various kind of careers as when a leader's energy, the positive or negative, has really shifted the overall momentum or mindset of a particular team in this kind of change context. And Lynn, back to you to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I've been really thinking about this because, you know, I could talk about some really senior leaders, but actually I want to talk about a leader that took on a really intractable problem. And for me, and this was 3 or 4 years ago, the manner and speed and capability in which the Metropolitan Police Service was answering the telephone had been a very significant problem for a long period of time, and that was failing Londoners. And it was a sort of unspoken rule in the organisation that this wasn't fixable. And we gave the problem to a leader who actually just really carefully, calmly looked at the problem. She looked at data, and I cannot stress this enough, the importance of data in actually understanding a problem and then working out whether the solutions you've put in place to that problem are being successful. And I'm afraid too many Tiggers don't do that. We had a solution, we've implemented a solution, everything's good. Well, actually, does the data confirm that? So she was relentless in following through the data points. Were we right? Was this diagnosis right? Is this change right? And over time, but significantly, performance improved. And some of that was about very tactical things like making sure that there were enough people at work when the big calls were coming in. But some of it was also about culture. She worked really hard to make sure that people believed things could be different. And interestingly, she stepped away. She was chosen to do another role because she'd done this one so effectively. And gradually the performance drifted back. And what that really helped me understand is one, the power of one, personality, but two, it wasn't yet embedded. So you can believe that you've taken the right steps and they've led to a result that everybody was very proud of. But actually, if you don't retain the focus, particularly on an intractable problem for a period of time, and ensure it isn't all reliant on one particular leader with a particular style, and they have the time to work with different teams, not to make clones. I think clones in leadership is not a healthy thing, but to say, you know, these are the levers that I pulled and you probably need to keep pulling them for a while, seems to me, at least in that one example, to be what's really needed.
Great, thanks. A really interesting example. Caroline, over to you.
I think just wanted to firstly sort of reiterate that what you said around motivation and mood being contagious is absolutely true, and particularly from leaders. They are the biggest mood amplifiers in any system. And actually what we know is that what's important is not about being relentlessly positive. In uncertainty, people look to leaders for signals of threat or safety. So emotional regulation actually matters more in these cases than enthusiasm does from our leaders. So I've seen leaders completely shift momentum just by showing a real calm realism. They acknowledge the difficulty, but whilst also staying really, really grounded. Equally, visible anxiety or cynicism spreads like wildfire. How I like to think of it is change leaders effectively act as like emotional barometers. And whether you're a psychologist or not, people read people. So whatever vibes a leader is giving off, that's what their people will be picking up on, over and above the words they're saying. There's that old phrase I've heard a number of times: I don't remember what they said, but I remember how they made me feel. That, in my opinion, is very pertinent for leaders.
Brilliant. Thanks, Caroline. And Chris?
I was just going to go off piece briefly then, and that gives me encouragement because I would always say on major programs, delivery programs, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you need a degree of calmness for it. And I just remember someone wrote on a 360 feedback for me once, Chris is worryingly calm, but I take that as a strength. But a couple of things that come to mind in terms of leaders' energy, I just got this quote from Conan Powell in my head, which is that positivity is a force multiplier. I think that's true. I remember I was in a meeting with my boss, and we were in a particularly difficult, intractable situation with some of our partners trying to deliver the program, and there wasn't agreement on the way forward, and there were some disagreements around that. And we were coming to the end of the meeting. I was kind of feeling like, well, we haven't really moved things on. And he just said, right, so we're gonna behave like this, and we're gonna do that, and we're gonna check in next time, aren't we? And nobody said anything, and that was the close of the meeting. I said to him afterwards, Andy, how could you say that? Because no one's believing that. And he said, well, Chris, no one contested it. I centered it on our values on the program, and I centered it on common ground, and we've got a clear checking in point next time. And sure enough, that in itself was enough to shift the dial, focusing, making a positive statement of intent around whether it's the values or the common ground that we have, can actually be quite a powerful thing. I learned a lot from that. The other thing that I haven't talked so much about is the sort of the leadership on programs in terms of the external space, not so much the internal program itself. And I remember the first year of Andy Mitchell's tenure as CEO on Tideway, he actually spent a lot of time outside advocating for the program. I had an opportunity just to ask him, why are you spending so much time outside? He said, well, I've got Mark, my COO, he's taking care of delivery. And his learning was that even though you may have the money, you may have the mandate, you may think the delivery's in your control, there's still a period where you need to garner support and goodwill towards the program and the outcomes of the program that you're trying to achieve outside of the program itself. And that if you don't do that, when you hit some roadblocks along the way, you're going to need to cash in on that goodwill somehow. So I thought that was quite wise, and some, an example of how his leadership energy was where he was pointing his energy as so much as how he was pointing his energy for the good of the program.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. So easy to look down and in rather than up and out. So great to hear that example, and a good reminder, I think, for everyone. Okay, I'm going to ask my final question now, but it actually reflects a great question we've had in the Q&A as well, which is going to ask you all to start thinking about your own behaviours, your own practice in leading changes. So I'm really keen to understand any examples you've got where you've either stopped doing something or where you've adopted a kind of new behaviour or new approach in how you lead change. And it kind of addresses one of the questions in the chat, which is what have you done personally to develop yourself so that you can lead change more effectively? So I'll go through each of you in turn. Lynn, I'll start again with you.
Thank you, Tom. I mean, the bottom line is you can't lead change authentically if you don't know what the people who are going to be impacted by the change may feel about it. So I think the word visibility is the wrong word and is overused, but I think direct personal conversations with those who are going to be affected by the change is so very, very important. And there is a risk that you fall into a trap of doing the traditional things like focus groups or surveys. But they have a tendency, in my humble opinion, and I've tested this, to attract a certain sort of person. Bluntly, either naysayers or over-optimists. And actually, there is a bulk of people in the middle that you need to work really hard to get to. And certainly in the Metropolitan Police Service, because it is such a big organisation, I had to really change my personal approach. So it wasn't enough just to make yourself visible amongst more junior people at a set position once every couple of months. It had to be a much more regular pattern. So, I mean, the Commissioner and I had a regular weekly one of these, a webinar where people could post. We would give 5 minutes, and then they had an hour of our time to post either anonymous questions or direct questions, as well as answering as many as we could direct on camera like this. We also took them all away, themed them, adapted the change plans accordingly. Yes, of course we had things like the staff survey. Even with that, in my time there, we did not shift the dial sufficiently on people's confidence in change. My sincere hope is that will shift over time, but my personal learning is distant written communication isn't enough. This thing called cascade communication I really dislike, because the message gets watered down as it's the Chinese whispers thing. So actually, as a leader that believes in the change, you have to invest personally. You can be surrounded by lots of programming experts, technical experts who will actually make things happen for you. But actually convincing people of the change is a leadership responsibility, and you need to change your practice and dedicate it into the people who are going to be affected, and listen and respond to what they're saying, just not hammer home that it's going to be fine message.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lynn. Caroline.
I love all of that, and probably some parallels in my own reflections on my own practice. A big shift has been what I've deliberately stopped doing. So like Lynn references, I've moved away from relying on those broadcast communications and from trying to sell the change to people. I think one thing I've learned over the years is that persuasion is far less effective than helping people make sense of the change together. So instead, I spend much more of my time on dialogue, so creating space for people to interpret what's changing, what's genuinely uncertain, and importantly, what's within their control. Involvement builds ownership far more effectively than big communication instructions ever will. So yeah, the biggest shift has been moving from convincing people to helping them make sense of what's really changing and what it means for them.
Brilliant, interesting and provocative at the same time. Thanks, Caroline. And Chris?
The first thing I suppose I would say, and I think we touched on it earlier about this sort of weight and burden of change that we're feeling, is I think some of that is perceived and some of it is of our own making, or either through our action or inaction. So one thing I've learned to do is when people come with issues or often which might relate to potential change, is to kind of do a triage on it, but do it in a way in which people feel that they're listened to, so that not every immediate issue that's burning red hot that might need a change of something, some process or some reactive change, if you like, actually does. And I found that when you go away, get more information, that red goes down to an amber, and sometimes it goes to green. But one other thing I've done and is actually quite common on major program now is some form of, let's say, a Dragon's Den forum where these things come in and they get some airtime, and then people can sort of actually then see that the sort of the criticality of the issue they go into the room with may have other factors in play, and that can help with change load. The other thing I would just mention is communication, communication, communication. I would say, or I used to say, you can never have enough communication on a major transformation program, but obviously that's got to be sensible and not splurged. So making sure that there is consistent repetition around purpose and where we're going, and kind of stage managing that as a leader is really important. But then in a practical level, one thing I've started doing is going and having lunches with teams and small teams, and just over the lunch, you can start to hear what's reality for them, and how they're feeling, the communication, and whether it's landing, and that is a real useful source of information just to kind of feed back to what we need to do as leaders.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Right, folks, we've got 10 minutes left. We've got quite a few questions come through, but please do post some more if you've got a question to ask, and I will do my best to get through them. I'll probably pose each question to one of our panelists just to try and get through as many as we can. Lynn, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, with this one. Really great question, which is, what was the most challenging team you walked through change in your career?
Oh, that's a very, very good, is a very good question. I think I'm going to say my period as Deputy Commissioner in the Met, and the reason for that is because in so many ways, every single day, there are outstanding officers and police staff colleagues who do amazing work to keep London safe. But we were facing the most awful incident where a police officer had murdered someone. I mean, nobody can think of anything. Every good, hardworking, well-minded officer was devastated by that, but they knew it said something about the organisation and our culture. In many respects, Her Majesty's Inspectorate, those who inspect policing, were talking about how we were failing victims of crime, and then much more hidden from the public, actually. But actually, officers and staff were saying, this is how you all think, you leaders think the organisation is structured, but actually the places where we are seeing increases in crime, so sexual violence, violence against women and girls, those teams are all massively understaffed, and they're holding workloads that make it impossible for them to serve the public. So it really was a whole organisational change. And effectively, when you are changing an organisation and trying to build on the positives of the culture, but deal very assertively with the negative aspects of the culture, at the same time as recognising that you need to move resources into different places, it's inevitable that there are going to be, I hate this phrase, but winners and losers. There are going to be some teams that say, actually, my life feels like it's getting better. And there are going to be other people who've built careers that they're very proud of, where you're having to make a choice to say, I'm really sorry, but actually we're not going to do that in the same way anymore, because as leaders, we're having to make the choice that this thing is the priority. And that's hard when it comes from, we're not criticising what you're currently doing, but we're having to prioritise some other things. So that was hard, because all of that was connected to people's values and their motivations, even though for all the reasons I've described, I'm absolutely certain the programme of reform that we started, that is still ongoing, was absolutely necessary.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Great to hear that experience and how you managed to handle the difficulty. Chris, I've got a question for you about Tideway specifically. So what did you do to co-create the culture on Tideway, in the sort of reference in one of your answers earlier on, so that it became more than words on paper?
Yeah, no, great question. So I guess a whole suite of things, but the starting point is you need to develop the culture before you have all of your partners for the enterprise, but not to be wedded to it, because if you do that, then it's a done to, not a co-created thing that's bought into. So there was a period of time called optimized contractor involvement, where we got our main works contractors in for about 3 to 6 months before the heavy construction started, where we we explored a whole bunch of things. Have we understood all the requirements? Have we understood the expectations and the values? And there were literally rooms, with white walls and some other sort of fun things to play with, to kind of start to create together, building off a foundation of values that was and culture that was aspired to already, but doing that together. And then agreeing together exactly how we were going to implement that, and making sure that we did it in a way, like coming back to sustaining, that we had check-in points, and we had ways of keeping that live over the long journey of the program. So that touched on health and safety, it touched on environmental performance, it touched on how we managed our stakeholders, it touched on chartering, how we work together and checking back in on all of that. But it's making space and time to do that together before you launch with your wider supply network and the market was really important to that.
Really interesting. Thanks, Chris. Really, really helpful response. Okay, Karen, I'm going to come to you and talk to you about data, if that's okay. This is something we've discussed amongst ourselves in the past. This came up actually in the conversation earlier in terms of using data. I think, Lynn, in your example, to kind of measure whether change was successful or not. One of our questioners and audience members has asked that, has highlighted actually that in quite a few of the organisations we're probably working with right now, that data's often quite a challenge, getting accurate data and timely data to help measure success. So do we have any, Karen, do you have any quick suggestions for quick wins or good examples of how we've been able to use data as an indicator of success for change, or any tips more generally in terms of how we can use data for change initiatives?
Yeah, I think I think it's a really important thing around actually, what decisions do you need to be able to make? What do you need to know as a result of the data that you're capturing? Because that really guides what data is relevant for you. Unfortunately, for many of us, the data that's readily available is not the ones that helps us make the decisions we want to make. And so we end up with this mismatch of, but we can capture this data, but we're trying to make these decisions. We can also burden teams with a lot of time and effort in terms of cleansing and capturing data in environments where it's not as in abundance to us. So I think sort of thinking really smartly and early on, so as early on as you can in a change program, around what the data points could be, what the pragmatic ways are that you can do them, but also how that might evolve over time. Because it might be that to start with, you've got a limited data set, but through the course of the program, you can build on those. You don't always need loads and loads of data points, and they can be quantitative, they can be qualitative on there, but thinking about it in a pragmatic way that actually helps you answer the questions you want to answer, reflects the work that you're doing, and is a practice that can be maintained throughout the course of the program, I think are the sort of key things that to think about through there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Karen. Some practical tips as well in there, which is really helpful. I'm conscious of the time. We're coming into the final couple of minutes now, so I think I'm going to start wrapping up the discussion. Firstly, thank you very much to all of our panelists today, to Lynn, to Chris and to Caroline. It's been a brilliant discussion. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure that the audience have as well, judging by the number of questions and interaction we've had. Lots of our audience members have really valued the contributions that you've made and the answers you've given, so thank you. Thank you all for coming as well. I hope it's been really useful, interesting. We haven't got through all of the questions, so we will endeavour to come back to people directly with some thoughts on some of those that we haven't quite got to, but thanks for posting them. As you can see on the screen now, if you've got any further questions or thoughts or would like to discuss any of these topics further, please do get in touch with either me directly or with Caroline. We'd be very happy to pick up and or kind of connect you to other panelists as helpful. If you are interested in coming up to one of our upcoming kind of follow-on sessions to this event, we're hosting a series of roundtables on this topic, some of which are sector specific. So again, please do get in touch directly if you'd like to participate in those. The next of these sessions will be happening in September with a focus on security culture. So I hope to see you then. But for now, that brings us to the end of our event. Thank you again to our brilliant panelists and to you all for joining. Thank you.